Hey everyone, Corinna Coffin here, Spartan Pro team athlete and registered dietitian. I'm back again in the kitchen to help you guys come up with some fun, healthy meal and snack ideas during this time when we're all kind of stuck in the house and trying to get creative with our meals. So this morning, I thought I would bring to you all breakfast quinoa because I know that at least for me, when I went to the grocery store last week, there were absolutely no oats left. And I was like, darn, oats are a perfect, breakfast food. It's kind of my go-to, especially if anyone in the obstacle course racing community, we all love our oats. So I was thinking about alternatives, what I had on hand in my pantry, what I could utilize. And I found this giant bag of quinoa. So obviously we know quinoa serves as a great side dish with dinner. I think a lot of us pair quinoa with, dinner mentality, a grain for lunch or dinner, but it can actually be an awesome breakfast grain. And so I wanted to share with you all two different recipes. They're both very simple. You can get the kids involved or you can keep them out of the kitchen, whatever is your strategy there. I've already made the quinoa this morning. Very simple, 2-to-1 ratio, very similar to rice. For 1 cup of quinoa, 2 cups of liquid. Now, in terms of creating a savory quinoa for dinner, lunches, I like to use vegetable or chicken broth to go with it, just to give it a little bit more like a salty, savory flavor. When you're doing breakfast quinoa, you can absolutely use leftover quinoa that you've made in chicken stock or vegetable stock the night before. But I will say what does help with a breakfast quinoa recipe is using either a milk base instead of water, a combination of milk and water, or what I did this morning, I actually used coconut milk, canned coconut milk. I'm running a little low on milk, and I like having a nice bowl of cereal every now and then. So I didn't want to use milk to create the quinoa and then milk later on in the recipe. I wanted to be mindful of that. So I have a couple cans of coconut milk in my pantry. I have some light coconut milk, which is lower fat, and I have some full fat. This one happens to be a full fat. So I open the can, you get that nice coconut film, the actual pulp of the coconut that kind of comes up to the top, especially in a full fat can. So I made a little puncture wound in there and just poured out some of the actual liquid. I've used probably a 1/2 cup of the coconut milk, and then I use the rest water. So again, I just wanted to make kind of like a creamier quinoa recipe. So I used that. Again, you can totally use water and be fine. But anyway, so I made the quinoa. I added a little bit of cinnamon while it was cooking, just to give it a little bit more flavor. But we'll definitely add more cinnamon to the recipe once we're here. So first things first, this is going to be super simple. I've already chopped up an apple and have sauteed here on my pan, which I think you guys can see. I used a little bit of butter, a little bit of cinnamon, and just a touch of maple syrup and heated it in a skillet. And so this is going to be kind of my cereal topping. And this, I realized that a lot of people might be running out of cereal at this point, or maybe, maybe that's something that's getting low in your pantry. So again, this breakfast quinoa cereal option is a great substitute. So I'm going to move this to the side. I already have my apples just sauteed a couple minutes on the stovetop. And I'm going to essentially do this just like I would with any bowl of cereal. I'm going to take my quinoa. This is still warm from this morning. It definitely does not have to be warm. So I'm just going to do a couple spoonfuls here as if I were just making good old cereal, just pouring out my cereal. So we've got that here in the bowl, as you guys can see. And I'm just going to add some various toppings. So I thought today it would be fun, like I said, to do the apple and do like an apple cinnamon idea. So I'm just going to pour. I feel very strange kind of sitting and doing all of this. But so I'm just going to put the apple on top, like so. It's nice to get some fruit in our breakfast in the morning for additional fiber. We have our fruit, we have our quinoa. Now, this is the time where I probably want to use milk. And again, you can absolutely use the coconut milk from the can. I'm going to use a little bit of my milk from the fridge and just pour it around like I would any regular cereal. And you can use whatever milk you want. I would recommend a higher protein milk just because we do have a lot of carbohydrates from our quinoa, which is actually a great source of protein as well. Quinoa is contains, of all grains, quinoa has the highest amount of protein. So we already have a great mix of protein and carbohydrates using our quinoa, but it might be nice to add a little bit more through cow's milk, soy milk. Almond milk doesn't really have a ton of protein. So again, maybe that's something you think about if you are able to add a little bit more protein to this dish. And then here, again, we can get creative with our toppings. So I'll add a little bit of cinnamon on top. If you want it sweeter, I did add maple syrup already to the sauteing apples on the stovetop, but if you want a little bit more, you can be in control of that using maple syrup or some honey. Here I have some flax and chia seeds. So if we think about, yesterday we talked about making sure we have a protein, a carbohydrate, and a fat in every meal, and making sure there's sufficient amounts of that. So if I take what I have so far, because I did make the quinoa in full fat canned coconut, I already have a decent amount of fat in this dish. We have the carbohydrates from our quinoa, which also has, as I mentioned, a higher amount of protein than most grains. You add a higher protein-based milk, and we have pretty much a good representation of all three of those macronutrients, which we want. But again, you can never go wrong with making it a more robust meal or a heartier meal in the morning. So I have here flaxseed and chia seeds, which again, going to increase that fiber content of the meal, going to keep us feeling fuller for longer, and also help with our gut health. So I might just sprinkle a little bit of flaxseed on top. You can stir that in and you won't be able to taste it. Same with our chia seeds here. Again, maybe just a tablespoon or two. You guys can do as much or as little as you want. And here we go. This is our breakfast quinoa. So now we have a really hearty, most cereal these days, maybe, pretty high in sugar or just maybe somewhat low in fiber, protein, all of that good stuff. So this is a great substitution for, kind of your typical boxed cereal meals. So looks beautiful. The great thing about this too is maybe I don't eat all of this, or maybe, maybe I make it and have to go do something. This can store very well in the refrigerator. The quinoa might soak up some of the milk a little bit, but for the most part, you've got all these great flavors here. You can almost treat it as an overnight oats kind of deal. So really great for now, really great for later as well. So I'm going to move this to the side here. Maybe you guys can see that a little better up front. Now we're going to make a breakfast quinoa parfait. So had I had oats, which I do have oats actually, but they're my backup stock supply for this coronavirus. I don't want to tap into some of those items. So I'm gonna stick with the quinoa because I do have a lot of it. I have a jar here, which you can absolutely use anything you want for this recipe, but for sake of showing you guys the layering, I thought I'd use a jar. And this is the fun part. We can get really creative with this, and kids will love this activity. I don't know something about layering is just so fun to do, and I can guarantee the kids will enjoy this as well. So get them involved, bring them in the kitchen. Just like I would with oats or granola, I'm going to use the quinoa as a substitute, and we're just going to layer between our primarily carbohydrate source. I have Greek yogurt here as additional protein, and then with our toppings, we definitely have fats. I brought back the pumpkin seeds from yesterday. We have chocolate chips to give it a little bit of a chocolate punch. I decided to go with a chocolate cherry recipe today because I have frozen cherries, and we should use what we have on hand. And I also have craisins, so I thought I would stick with this cherry kind of cranberry type theme. Now, one thing that's great about this recipe is the ability to add so much, like I said, but the protein powder too can come into play. So I have a tub of chocolate protein powder. If I wanted to, and if I felt like, gosh, I'd love to give this recipe a little bit more flavor, I could use that and mix it in with my yogurt. I think for today's purposes, we have plenty of protein here between our grains and the yogurt, so I'm going to leave that aside. But again, the fun part, you can start with honestly whatever, but I'm going to use quinoa as my base. I have a feeling I'm going to get kind of messy with this. I'm a total kitchen slob, but I do make good food, so my boyfriend forgives me for that. But again, we're just going to kind of start our layering process. So quinoa's at the bottom. I'm going to use a little bit of Greek yogurt here. Again, I didn't want to go through my entire Greek yogurt supply, so we might have to use this somewhat sparingly and just increase our amounts of fruit and other toppings. So got a good layer here. I'm going to take out some of these frozen cherries that I have, and they're whole, they're pitted, but I'm just going to use maybe a couple here. And you can you can layer up with maple syrup or more cinnamon, vanilla extract, kind of up to you. I'm going to sprinkle in some chocolate chips, a little dark chocolate at breakfast, never hurt anyone. And we have our pumpkin seeds here. And again, when we eat this, I mean, when you stick your spoon down in there and you're getting a little bit of all of those layers. So that makes it really nice. You're going to get a little bit of everything in one bite. So that's the fun part about this recipe. So I've got one layer here. I'm going to continue adding on another layer of quinoa. And again, if you're more of like, okay, I want mostly Greek yogurt, maybe a higher amount of protein, maybe a little bit less carbohydrate in the morning, you can do more thicker layers of the yogurt. Like I said, for me, I want to spare my yogurt a little bit, so we're gonna use a good amount of quinoa. So if I was a little bit neater in the kitchen, these would be beautiful layers, but it's I was dealt the messy hand, so that's that. You can get an idea though with the layers here. So I'm going to a little bit more pumpkin seed, a little bit more cherries. And these are great to make in advance as well. So just like an overnight oat, it doesn't have to soak up any liquid, which is nice. So I could very well eat that right now, but we do have the option of putting a cap on this and storing it in the fridge for later. But we essentially have our dish right here. And it looks really nice. I mean, I could have made it a lot nicer, but you guys can see nice layering here. Kids would love it. Kids love like having their own kind of build your own type system, I think, with food. And so I feel like this is a great option for them. Again, we've got our protein, our carbohydrate, our fat source from our pumpkin seeds. And then at the top, you can even top off with some chia seeds and flax seeds. So that's what I'll do. And that looks beautiful. So, I mean, this is a very simple 2 recipes here today. I really think quinoa is a great and versatile grain to use for anything. Like I said, it can be savory at dinner time, but explore a little bit of your options with the breakfast sweeter type of quinoa, because it is such an awesome grain. It does contain all 9 essential amino acids. So it's one of the few plant sources that actually contains all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient amounts. I think most plant foods do contain all 9, but there's some that are very limited. Some of those amino acids that are very limited in other plant foods. So This is a great source. What we can also do with quinoa, and what I was going to do today, but I decided to save it for another morning, is a quinoa granola, homemade granola. So you can actually use raw quinoa, which is really cool because sometimes it's kind of a pain to make quinoa. You have to boil the water and let it simmer for a little while. So this recipe that I was working from just has you using plain, uncooked, raw quinoa mixed with some nuts. It does include a little bit of oats as well, but putting that in the oven with some sweetener and maybe some coconut oil is just makes a great, delicious homemade granola, lightly toasted. And at some point, I have a good supply of granola on hand, so I also didn't want to make more of that today, but that's another option to utilize, and maybe we'll get there down the road. So again, my name's Corinna, coming at you guys 3 times a week to review recipes and healthy nutrition tips to help you guys get through this tough time. It's what we don't want is for you all to have to, and I'm sure what you guys don't want as well, is to be going out making copious amounts of grocery store trips throughout the week. So I'm hoping to make really versatile recipes that, if you don't have quinoa, you can use oats, or, you have all these substitutions which you can utilize, and a lot of different options, because we want to make this helpful for you. So if you have comments or questions, drop them below. Would love to get back to you all on this. Join us again tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. I'll be right back with you guys soon. Thanks.